In a quiet village called Jola, nestled deep within the vast savannas of Africa, lived a young man named Ifeanyi. Ifeanyi was not like the other villagers who were content with their simple lives. They were happy with their small mud huts, their fields of yams and cassava, and the rhythm of their daily tasks. They sang songs as they worked, and in the evenings, they would gather around the fire to tell stories passed down from their ancestors. But Ifeanyi, though he joined in their songs and stories, carried a deep longing in his heart. He dreamed of riches, of wealth so vast that it would shine brighter than the sun and make him the most powerful man in Jola. Every day, Ifeanyi would watch the traders who passed through the village on their way to distant lands. These traders wore clothes made of the finest fabrics, adorned with gold and precious stones that glimmered in the sunlight. Their donkeys and camels carried heavy loads of exotic goods, silks from the east, spices from the south, and shimmering jewels that dazzled the eye. Ifeanyi envied them. He imagined himself draped in gold, with servants attending to his every need. He wanted more than the simple life Jola had to offer. He wanted to be rich, powerful, and respected. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty roads of the village, Ifeanyi overheard a conversation between two old men sitting outside the village chief's compound. They spoke in hushed tones about a mysterious man who lived on the edge of the great forest that bordered Jola. This man, they said, was a powerful shaman who possessed the secret to boundless wealth. But the villagers warned that the price to learn the secret was steep, and many who sought it never returned. Ifeanyi's heart raced with excitement. Could this be the answer to his dreams? He had to find this man, no matter the cost. That night, under the cover of darkness, he left his small hut and ventured into the forest. The trees loomed tall and ominous, their branches twisting like skeletal hands reaching out to grab him. The path was narrow and overgrown, with roots and vines snaking across the ground, making every step treacherous. Strange noises echoed from deep within the woods, distant howls, the rustling of leaves, and the calls of nocturnal creatures. But Ifeanyi pressed on, his mind fixated on the thought of the riches that awaited him. After what seemed like hours of walking through the dense forest, Ifeanyi finally came upon a small, crumbling hut. A single flickering light shone from inside, casting eerie shadows on the ground. Ifeanyi approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. As he reached the door, it creaked open on its own, revealing a hunched old man with piercing eyes that seemed to see right through him. "I know why you have come," the old man rasped, his voice like the rustling of dry leaves in the wind. "You seek wealth, but are you willing to pay the price?" Ifeanyi nodded eagerly, too consumed by his desire to care about the warnings he had heard. The old man smiled, revealing teeth as black as night. He beckoned Ifeanyi inside, where strange symbols were etched into the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of burning herbs and something more sinister that Ifeanyi couldn't quite place. "There is a way," the old man said, sitting by the fire that crackled and hissed in the hearth. "But it is not for the faint of heart. You must eat the feces of a human, and only then will the spirits grant you the wealth you desire." Ifeanyi recoiled in horror, his stomach churning at the thought. The idea of consuming something so foul was beyond anything he had ever imagined. But the old man's words echoed in his mind, wealth beyond imagination, power, influence. He could have it all, but only if he paid the price. The old man handed Ifeanyi a small, wrapped bundle. "Take this and return to your village. When the time is right, you will know what to do." Ifeanyi took the bundle with trembling hands and left the hut, his mind swirling with thoughts of what he had to do. The walk back to the village felt longer, the trees seemed to close in around him, and the shadows grew darker. When he finally reached his hut, he placed the bundle on the table, but he could not bring himself to open it. The fear and revulsion were too strong. Days turned into weeks, and Ifeanyi grew more desperate. His poverty gnawed at him like a hungry beast, and the sight of the wealthy traders passing through the village filled him with envy and rage. He avoided the gaze of the other villagers, especially that of Amma, a kind young woman who often brought him food and spoke to him with gentle words. Amma had always shown Ifeanyi kindness even when others in the village shunned him for his restless ambition. But Ifeanyi's desire for wealth had consumed him, and he found it increasingly difficult to look Amma in the eye, knowing the darkness that now festered within him. One night, when the moon was full and the village was silent, Ifeanyi finally unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a small, dried piece of feces. The smell was foul, filling his small heart with an overwhelming stench that made Ifeanyi gag. His stomach churned, and he felt bile rise in his throat. But the old man's words haunted him, wealth beyond imagination. It was so close, just within his reach. Ifeanyi hesitated, his hand trembling as he brought the feces to his lips. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the disgust and fear that threatened to overwhelm him. But just as he was about to eat it, a loud knock echoed through his heart, startling him so badly that he dropped the bundle. His heart pounded in his chest as he rushed to the door, fear and guilt twisting inside him. Standing outside was Amma, her eyes wide with fear and concern. "Ifeanyi," she whispered urgently, "what are you doing? I had a terrible dream that something bad was going to happen to you. Please, whatever it is, don't do it." Ifeanyi's heart ached at the sight of Amma's worried face. He wanted to tell her everything, to pour out the dark thoughts that had been consuming him, but the fear of losing his chance at wealth silenced him. Instead, he forced a smile, one that did not reach his eyes, and assured her that everything was fine. Amma wasn't convinced. She could see the turmoil in Ifeanyi's eyes, but she didn't press him further. With a heavy heart, she left, her footsteps echoing softly in the night. Ifeanyi watched her go, torn between his desire for riches and the warmth and kindness in Amma's eyes that made him feel something he had long buried. But as soon as she was out of sight, the hunger for wealth hardened his resolve once more. This time, Ifeanyi didn't hesitate. He picked up the feces, and with a deep breath, he ate it, forcing it down despite the vile taste that burned in his mouth and made him retch. Each bite was a battle against his own disgust, but he pressed on, driven by the thought of the riches that awaited him. When he was done, he collapsed on the floor, exhausted, sickened, and filled with a deep sense of dread. For days, nothing happened. Ifeanyi began to doubt the old man's words, wondering if he had been tricked, if he had gone through this ordeal for nothing. He grew increasingly anxious, barely eating or sleeping, haunted by the memory of what he had done. The villagers began to notice his absence from their daily activities, and whispers spread through Jola about Ifeanyi's strange behavior. Amma, too, was worried. She tried to visit Ifeanyi again, but each time she approached his hut, she found the door shut tight, and no response came to her calls. Then, one morning, Ifeanyi awoke to find a pile of gold coins at the foot of his bed. Ifeanyi could hardly believe his eyes. The old man had been right. He was rich. Overwhelmed with joy, Ifeanyi gathered the coins, feeling their weight in his hands, the cold metal reassuring him that his sacrifice had not been in vain. Ifeanyi wasted no time in spending his newfound wealth. He built a grand house, far larger and more splendid than any in the village. The walls were adorned with beautiful carvings, the floors covered in rich, colorful rugs, and the shelves filled with fine pottery and ornaments made of gold and silver. He dressed in the finest clothes, made from fabrics so soft they felt like a second skin. He hosted extravagant feasts, inviting traders and nobles from distant lands, who marveled at his sudden fortune and praised his wealth and taste. The villagers of Jola were in awe of Ifeanyi's transformation. They whispered among themselves, wondering how he had come by such riches. Some were envious, others fearful, but none dared to question Ifeanyi directly. They remembered the old tales of dark magic and the dangers of dealing with the spirits, and they kept their distance, unsure of what Ifeanyi had done to gain his wealth. But Ifeanyi did not care about the whispers or the growing unease among the villagers. He was consumed by his new life, reveling in the luxury and the admiration that came with it. For a time, he forgot the dark deed that had brought him this wealth. He forgot the old man and the ominous warnings that had been given to him. All that mattered was the gold, the power, and the respect that he had always craved. However, as the days turned into weeks, Ifeanyi began to notice strange things happening around him. At first, it was just small, unsettling occurrences, a shadow flickering at the corner of his vision, a chill in the air that seemed to follow him wherever he went, the feeling of being watched even when he was alone. But soon, the strange occurrences became more frequent and more terrifying. At night, when Ifeanyi lay in his grand bed, he would hear whispers in the darkness, voices that seemed to come from the very walls of his house. They spoke in a language he could not understand, but their tone was filled with malice and hunger. The shadows in his house began to move on their own, twisting and writhing like living things. Ifeanyi would wake in the middle of the night to find dark figures standing at the foot of his bed, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. But when he blinked, they would vanish, leaving him trembling and drenched in cold sweat. Ifeanyi's once grand feasts became quiet, subdued affairs. The traders and nobles who had once flocked to his house began to avoid it, their own unease growing with each visit. They spoke of a darkness that lingered in the air, of a sense of dread that settled over them as soon as they crossed the threshold. Ifeanyi's wealth, once a source of pride, became a prison, trapping him in a house filled with terror and shadows. Desperate for answers, Ifeanyi decided to return to the forest and seek out the old man. He needed to know if the spirits were after him, if there was some way to appease them and end the torment that now filled his life. But when he reached the old man's hut, he found it abandoned. The fire that had once burned in the heart was cold, and the strange symbols on the walls had faded, as if they had never been there. It was as if the old man had never existed, as if Ifeanyi had imagined the entire encounter. Panic set in as Ifeanyi rushed back to the village, his mind racing with fear. But as he neared his grand house, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Standing at his doorstep was Oma, her face pale and her eyes filled with sadness. "Ifeanyi," she said softly, "you were warned, but you didn't listen." Ifeanyi's heart sank. "Oma, what do you mean?" "The spirits," Oma whispered, her voice trembling, "they are not done with you. You took something that was not yours to take, and now they have come to collect their debt." Before Ifeanyi could respond, a cold wind swept through the village, howling like a pack of wild animals. The ground beneath him began to tremble, and the air grew thick with an oppressive darkness. The shadows that had haunted him for weeks materialized, swirling around him like a storm. Ifeanyi screamed, but no sound escaped his lips. The spirits had come to claim their due, and Ifeanyi realized too late that the price for his greed was far more than he had ever imagined. The villagers watched in horror as Ifeanyi was consumed by the darkness, his riches turning to dust before their eyes. Amma wept, knowing that Ifeanyi's fate could have been avoided if only he had listened to the warnings. She had tried to save him, but Ifeanyi's hunger for wealth had been too great, blinding him to the dangers that lay in wait. And so, the tale of Ifeanyi's greed spread throughout the land, a cautionary story told to children for generations. The villagers of Jola returned to their simple lives, content with what they had, and wary of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. They spoke of Ifeanyi in hushed tones, a reminder that some prices are too high to pay, no matter the reward. But deep in the forest, where the old man's hut once stood, a new fire was lit, and the whispers began again, waiting for the next soul eager for riches, willing to pay any price. The spirits were patient, knowing that there would always be someone like Ifeanyi, someone who wanted more than they had, someone willing to risk everything for the promise of wealth. The villagers of Jola continued with their lives, but the memory of Ifeanyi's fate lingered like a shadow over the village. Amma, who had tried so hard to save Ifeanyi, was haunted by the thought that she could have done more, that she should have tried harder to reach him. She could not shake the feeling that Ifeanyi's soul was still out there, lost in the darkness, trapped by the very wealth he had sought. As the years passed, Amma grew older, but the pain of losing Ifeanyi never left her. She never married, choosing instead to live a quiet life, tending to her small garden and helping the other villagers whenever she could. But every night, as she lay in bed, she would pray for Ifeanyi's soul, hoping that one day he would find peace. But the spirits were not so kind. They had claimed Ifeanyi, and they were not willing to let him go. His greed had bound him to them, and they would keep him in the darkness, a prisoner of his own desires, for all eternity. And so, the tale of Ifeanyi and the spirits became a warning, a reminder that some things are better left alone, that the pursuit of wealth and power can lead to ruin. The villagers of Jola told the story to their children, who told it to their children, and so on, ensuring that the memory of Ifeanyi's fate would never be forgotten. But deep in the forest, where the old man's heart once stood, the whispers continued, waiting for the next soul who would be willing to pay the price. For the spirits knew that there would always be someone like Ifeanyi, someone who wanted more than they had, someone willing to risk everything for the promise of wealth. And when that day came, the spirits would be ready, waiting to claim their next victim.